On the evening of November 23, 2009, 22-year-old student Li Lei was chatting to her boyfriend on the social media site QQ while watching TV. After chatting for a couple of hours, she abruptly stopped responding to the boyfriend's messages. But as it was late, he just assumed she'd fallen asleep. 3 days later, an uncle of Li Lei, Wang Jun, was contacted by the employer of his older sister Wang Meiling, asking if he knew where she was, as she hadn't turned up to work, and attempts to contact her went unanswered. Around this time, a teacher at the local primary school noticed that one of her students, the son of Wang Meiling, was absent from school on the 24th of November, and her attempts to contact the family were ignored. She eventually managed to speak to the boy's father Li Lei, older brother of Li Lei, and husband to Wang Meiling. She inquired as to why the boy was absent from school. In response, she was rather curtly told to speak to the boy's grandfather before the call was cut off. Wang Jun, unable to get into contact with his sister, visited Qingcheng Mingyuan, a residential community in the Daxing district of Beijing, where she shared a home with her husband, their 2 young sons, her sister-in-law, and her husband's parents. Arriving at the home, he found all the doors locked and ground floor curtains closed, with no sign of activity inside. After knocking and shouting outside the building for a while, Wang Jun knew something was wrong, and asked a neighbor if they had a ladder he could borrow. Climbing the ladder and looking through one of the second-floor windows, he saw the legs of someone lying motionless on the ground. The emergency services were called, and after arriving at the scene, police forced their way inside. On entering the building, the police were greeted with the sight of a woman lying dead in a pool of blood in the home's lounge. The female victim was later identified as 50-year-old Xiang Xiaohua, whose throat had been fatally sliced open. Continuing to move through the home, police quickly found another body lying in a pool of blood in a corridor leading to the home's toilet. The victim's death being caused by a knife wound to the throat. The male victim would later be identified as Li Hanchao, the husband of Xiang Xiaohua, who was 50 years old at the time of his death. Horrifyingly, the grim discoveries continued as the investigating officers moved on to searching the bedrooms. In the first bedroom, they found the body of a 22-year-old woman lying on the floor by her bed, who would later be confirmed as Li Lei, the daughter of Xiang Xiaohua and Li Hanchao. This time, the victim's life was ended after suffering multiple injuries from a knife. In the neighboring bedroom, a fourth body, partly covered by a pile of duvets, was found. As with Li Lei, the death was down to the victim suffering multiple injuries caused by a knife. The victim would later be identified as the older sister of the man to report the incident, 33-year-old Wang Meiling. She was married to the son of Xiang Xiaohua and Li Hanchao, and sister-in-law to Li Lei. Having already found 4 members of the same family brutally slain, police could have been forgiven for thinking it couldn't get much worse. But on searching the final bedroom in the home, they'd be proven shockingly wrong. Lying on the bed were the bodies of 2 young boys, one around 6 years old, the other barely over a year, both children's throats cut open. Police tried to make sense of the devastating scene facing them. There were no signs of forced entry into the home. Electronic equipment, money, and other valuable items were left untouched. Someone had made a half-hearted attempt to clean up the scene, but lazily abandoned it. The only thing missing from the home was the final member of the family. Police were quickly able to get the name of the missing man from Wang Jun. Li Lei was husband to Wang Meiling, the older brother to Li Lei, son to Xiang Xiaohua and Li Hanchao, and the father to the 2 young boys. Wang Jun had tried to contact him after his sister's employer called to ask about her whereabouts, but his calls were left unanswered. Police set about trying to track him down, unsure at first if Li Lei was to be treated as a suspect or missing person. Li Lei was doing quite well financially for the family. He had a number of businesses earning him good money, and had invested well in property, making him a few million yuan in the process. However, some of his business interests were described as being gray, technically illegal, but the types of things to which police would often turn a blind eye until they received complaints. The gray businesses he was running were largely cashing people's credit cards and a pawning business. This would undoubtedly introduce him to individuals who had debts to pay, were desperate for cash, and it was no secret that the Li family had money. The first step in trying to find answers to his apparent disappearance saw police head to the community's security office and pore over the surveillance footage. On seeing the images, Li Lei would be moved firmly into the suspect category. In the surveillance video, a man was seen entering the home at 11 p.m. on November 23rd. The same man was then seen walking out of the home at 8:13 a.m. the following morning with a large bag and mop in hand. He disposed of the mop before placing the bag into the trunk of a car registered to Li Lei and driving away. The vehicle returned to the community about 2 hours later. The man entered the home for around 10 minutes before returning to the vehicle, driving away, and wouldn't be seen again. There were no other individuals seen entering or leaving the home during the time frame. However, the video footage didn't give police a clear image of the man caught on camera, so they began speaking to friends and business partners of Li Lei, asking if anyone knew of his whereabouts. With help from members of the Li family, police were pointed in the direction of a man with whom Li Lei owned a hotel. The business partner told police Li Lei came to him on the evening of November 24th to go over the hotel accounts for the previous month and asked for almost 3,000 yuan to be put into his personal bank account. The partner told police he saw nothing unusual about Li Lei that aroused suspicions that something was wrong. He then received a call from Li Lei on November 26th to confirm the payment had gone through. After this, the business partner had no further contact with the suspect. He went on to tell investigators that Li Lei was planning a business trip to Shenzhen, in Guangdong province, with another man who owned a hair salon and foot bath parlor with the fugitive. By tracking his ID number, police discovered that Li Lei purchased 2 train tickets to Shenzhen for himself and another individual named Lu Shengli. The ID card of Lu Shengli was found to have registered at a hotel in Shenzhen on November 27th, and was then used to purchase 2 bus and ferry tickets to Saiya on the island province Hainan, where again the ID card of Lu Shengli was used to register at a hotel. Beijing police contacted their counterparts in Hainan, requesting they arrest Li Lei and transport him back to Beijing to be questioned. Just a few hours later, Li Lei was arrested at the hotel where Lu Shengli registered. He made little effort to resist and calmly allowed police to take him away. The police in Hainan detained Li Lei and organized his transportation back to Beijing to be interrogated. While being held, Li Lei confessed that he ended the lives of his parents, wife, sister, and 2 young sons. Back in Beijing, Li Lei slowly went through the details of his family annihilation and the circumstances leading him to brutally slaughter 6 members of his family.
8人杀了，然后是杀了我妹妹，然后是我父亲，然后我母亲，最后就俩小孩呗。
On November 21st, Li Lei had made plans to go to Shenzhen with Lu Shengli on business, but his father wanted to attend a relative's wedding on the 22nd. Li Hanchao insisted his son delay the trip and drive him to the celebration. Li Lei reluctantly put off the trip until November 24th. On the 23rd of November, he was out with friends when his wife Wang Meiling called him and demanded he return home.
每个月必须完成那什么呀，9万的净营业额，因为他每个月他卖不了这么多，知道吧？我每个月我都得，然后给他，比如说缺个4、5万、5、6万的，然后我就拿自己钱往上补回。
Wang Meiling was employed doing sales for the multi-level marketing company Amway, and as such had to reach monthly sales targets. However, she rarely managed to reach the target, and demanded Li Lei gave her money, allowing her to make up the difference. This had become a regular thing, and so Li Lei believed that if his wife couldn't achieve enough sales, she should quit her job, as the family were more than comfortable financially, and she was just throwing money away. When he returned home at around 11 p.m., she told him she needed 50,000 yuan to meet her targets. The couple got into an argument about it, Li Lei telling her what he thought, which only angered her further.
感觉就是特别不平衡。我家里边所有钱都是我挣的，为什么每天老限制我这自由？干这干那的，几点回家？躺床上气呼的，今天晚上哪根筋也不对了，起来又拿刀就给他杀了。
When the argument calmed, he lay down on his bed for around an hour and smoked a few cigarettes, while his parents and children were sleeping, and his sister was chatting online with her boyfriend. He got up and took out a knife, waiting for Wang Meiling to come back to the bedroom. As she entered, he immediately attacked her with the weapon, injuring her numerous times. She had no time to react, scream, or shout for help, before her life was extinguished.
完事躺床上，我躺了一会儿吧。我躺了一会儿，完脑袋挺晕的，感觉越想越恨越气，反正。进我妹那屋门也没锁，我进去把我妹给杀了。
Taking a moment, he laid down again, then entered his sister's room, attacking her without a word. Li Can dead, he went to the bathroom to clean blood off his hands and face, before going back to his own bedroom, and sat on his bed in the dark.
洗手洗脸，洗脸，全都是血呗，全洗完了，躺我又回我那屋里边，床上坐会儿，晚上就是发呆呗，坐那儿。具体时间我也忘了什么时候了。我爸一推门进来了，知道吗？我也不知道他怎么进这个屋。
As he sat on the edge of his bed, there was then a knock on his bedroom door, which he ignored. His father opened the door from outside, and was immediately attacked with a knife to the throat from his son. Again, his victim had no time to react and didn't make a sound before their life ended.
倒地之后，我停了，我就愣了，知道吗？发了可能2分钟呆吧。听着外边有动静，知道吗？就是客厅啊。我妈出来了，知道吗？我妈出来也跟我父亲那一样，也是迎面脖子一刀。
Standing over his slain father's body in a daze, he was suddenly alerted by a noise coming from the lounge. His mother came out of her bedroom to see where Li Hanchao was. Li Lei approached her, and without hesitation slashed her neck open with his knife. He sat down in the lounge smoking until it was almost dawn. He then decided to enter the bedroom which his children shared with their grandparents.
我们这一家人都没了，感觉他们他妈活着也没什么劲。讲完以后受罪了，杀了得了。
Being careful not to wake the sleeping children, he calmly, and without any emotion, ended their lives. Neither child waking during the attack. He then made an attempt to clean up the blood, but soon gave up. He covered 3 of the bodies with quilts, and then left the home. He told police he'd wanted to end his father's life for many years, as the two never had a good relationship. He further claimed his wife's nagging and constant criticism became too much, as he considered himself a good husband, and that evening he just snapped. But when asked why he decided to end the lives of his sister, mother, and 2 young sons, he simply replied that he couldn't remember. The media quickly picked up the tragic story, and they, along with police, wanted to know more about what led to the incident. This would see family members, friends, business partners, and neighbors of Li Lei interviewed, and 2 different possible motivations emerged. Born in 1980, Li Lei was a native of the Daxing district of Beijing. Shortly after he was born, his parents went to work in another city, leaving him to be raised by his grandparents. Being an only child at the time, and crucially a boy, his grandparents doted on and somewhat spoiled him during his early childhood, which Li Lei would consider one of the happiest periods of his life. However, when he was 8 years old and now in primary school, his parents returned home, and Li Lei quickly found his father had a very different approach to raising him, with much harsher methods. His parents had saved a decent amount of money while away working, and were able to establish their own company on their return. Li Hanchao was a strict disciplinarian who had certain expectations of his son, and made them abundantly clear to the young boy. If Li Lei did anything his father considered out of line, or not up to his standards of behavior, he'd receive vicious beatings, with either a stick or leather belt, whichever his father decided was more suitable. To ensure the young boy didn't forget what would happen if he was perceived to have misbehaved, his father's weapons of choice were a constant reminder hanging on his bedroom door. Unsurprisingly, the child retreated into himself. Terrified of saying or doing something wrong, he became extremely introverted, and resentful towards his father for the beatings, and his mother for not protecting him from the violence. That resentment only grew after the birth of his sister. He felt his parents clearly favored her, spoiling the girl and never punishing her in the same way. The different treatment they received from their parents didn't escape his sister's notice as she grew. They never developed a close relationship, and when they got into a sibling quarrel, his sister would make sure to tell their father, which would lead to more beatings for Li Lei. Miserable for most of his childhood, Li Lei dropped out of school at the age of 17 and ran away from home. He headed to the Xihongmen area of Beijing and looked for work.
想干一番事业，自己在外边好好的闯荡闯荡，自己想那个干点露脸的事儿，让家里边人看看。
While there, he worked hard in whatever job he found, and was making an impressive 3,000 to 4,000 yuan a month, much more than his peers and well over the average monthly salary at the time. After a little over a year away, and feeling like he'd been somewhat of a success by himself, he made the decision to return home, hoping his parents would be proud of him. He'd had no contact with his family since deciding to run away, and when he returned he was surprised by his parents' reaction. Both his mother and father broke down in tears, and seemed genuinely happy to see him return, but the feelings of being a happy family wouldn't last long. The beatings stopped, but the abuse from his father was now verbal. He constantly insulted and belittled his son for whatever faults he perceived. In 1999, Li Lei, who was 19 at the time, met 22-year-old Wang Meiling, who was working in a hair salon in Xihongmen town. She'd moved to Beijing from Zhumadian, in Henan province a few years prior. Not long after meeting, the couple would marry, and with the money Li Lei earned, they opened a hair salon together. The pair made a good team in business. While Li Lei was introverted, he worked hard and had a good business sense. Wang Meiling, on the other hand, was much more outgoing, better with people, and had the experience to know how to run the salon. The hair salon was a success, making 5,000 to 6,000 yuan a month, a pretty significant amount at the time. Li Lei was originally concerned about introducing Wang Meiling to his family. He'd told her about the issues he had with his father specifically. However, his concerns were unwarranted, as his wife, mother, and most surprisingly father got on well. And it wouldn't be long before Li Lei was being pressured by his parents to start having children. Li Lei was more focused on improving his financial situation, and with the hair salon doing well, he started other small businesses. His first son was born in 2002, and Wang Meiling would begin to step away from running the hair salon to take care of their son. Li Lei continued to expand his business portfolio, investing in a hotel, footbath parlors, and the gray businesses. Despite his relative success, and the fact he was providing for his own family, along with that of his wife's, his father was still highly critical of him. He felt working in the gray businesses was risky, and caused the family to lose face. In his own eyes, Li Lei was doing everything a son and man should for his family, and the resentment towards his father he felt during his childhood was becoming a festering hatred. And in 2009, something that should have been cause for celebration would lead Li Lei down the road to annihilating his family.
我跟外边的人吧，感觉都人家给我印象都是特别好，知道吗？我就感觉为什么回到家里边，家里边人对我就这样， 我就理解不了这点事儿。
The Beijing government had marked the area of his childhood home as the site of a major development project. Line 4 of the Beijing subway was going to be built, and the area of Tiangongyuan was set to be demolished for the project to proceed. All residents and business owners in the area were offered compensation for the demolition of their properties, and the Li family were paid 6 million yuan for their home and business. The money was divided between the family members, Li Lei using some of his share to buy 5 properties, including the home in Qingcheng Mingyuan, into which his parents and sister moved, sharing with Li Lei, Wang Meiling, and the now 2 young sons. It'd be the first time he'd be living with his father since running away at the age of 17, and things did not go well, almost from the start. It is an extremely common phenomenon in China for multiple generations of a family to live under the same roof, and it often leads to conflicts. However, this is generally more between a spouse and their in-laws. In the case of Li Lei, that wouldn't be the issue. His wife got on very well with his parents, to the point where she'd openly agree with his father's criticisms of him, and take his father's side in all disagreements. Arguments took place frequently, especially over what they should do with the compensation they'd received from the government, any suggestions made by Li Lei being shut down by his parents and wife. Despite him being the only person to provide the family with a regular income, his wife now doing Amway sales, losing more money than she made, his parents retired, and just taking care of the children, Li Lei had little say in the management of the family finances. Li Lei didn't even own the home he'd bought with his portion of the compensation, his father demanding the ownership deeds be put in his name despite not paying a penny towards it. Before they all lived together, Li Lei would vent his frustrations about his father to Wang Meiling, but now she was treating him as his father did, constantly belittling and criticizing him. Friends and business partners of Li Lei noticed a change in his personality during this time. Never the most outgoing talkative man, he'd often open up more when around people he was comfortable with. Now, however, it seemed he'd completely retreated into himself, often sitting with his friends not saying a word for hours, just quietly drinking, as if he was lost in a trance. He was drinking much more heavily than before, and in August 2009, this would be costly. While driving into the community under the influence, he drove into a grandfather out walking with his granddaughter. The old man suffered fairly severe damage to his knee in the collision, and Li Lei was ordered to pay 180,000 yuan as compensation. Not wanting to stay home, he spent more time outside drinking, desperate to avoid having to be around the family members he believed were against him. Wang Meiling didn't appreciate him spending time and money like this, and so would call him regularly to return home by a certain time, essentially giving him a curfew to obey or face more criticisms from his family. Li Lei was increasingly feeling he had no control over his life. When she called and ordered him to return home on the evening of November 23rd, and then demanded he hand over 50,000 yuan to make up the shortfall in her sales targets, despite her already controlling his finances, Li Lei snapped. He took out the years of built-up frustration, anger and resentment on his entire family, seemingly doing so in a calm, methodical, almost robotic manner. That at least was the reasoning Li Lei gave while voicing a long, somewhat self-pitying confession. However, when police spoke to neighbors, friends and business partners, they were given a different possible motive. This was largely hearsay and rumor, Li Lei himself denying it later. However, it did get widely reported in the coverage of the case, and a number of people told the exact same story, which for many was a much more convincing motive for the brutal attack on his own family. Multiple neighbors informed police of a furious argument they overheard coming from the home of the Li family, just a few months prior to the incident. While they couldn't hear every word clearly, they heard enough to know what the argument was about, and told police the shouting coming from the home concerned the relationship between the wife and father of Li Lei, Wang Meiling, and Li Hanchao. Ever since the family moved into the community, it had been noticed, and become a frequent source of gossip that the father and daughter-in-law had an especially close relationship. They were seen leaving the home together on a regular basis, after Li Lei left to go out to work in the mornings, returning together several hours later, a little before Li Lei came home. With his share of the compensation money, Li Lei had bought 4 other properties in the district. When police followed up the reports from neighbors in the community, interviewing building managers and neighbors of the other properties, they would be told that Wang Meiling and Li Hanchao frequently used one fairly close by. The properties had been bought as investments for the future, and the one used by Li Hanchao and Wang Meiling had been unoccupied since purchase. The argument overheard by several neighbors was about Li Lei visiting the property unexpectedly and finding his wife in bed with his father. As the argument blazed on, Li Lei allegedly questioned whether or not his youngest son, who was only a few months old, was actually his son, or was in fact his half-brother. The mother of Li Lei was supposedly heard begging her son not to make the news public, in order to save the family's face. However, with the neighbors hearing the fight inside the home, that was already too late. It was after this argument that the drinking of Li Lei got to the point of alcoholism, and he seemed to completely shut down socially, his friends and business colleagues noticing his mental decline. While he didn't speak much to friends and business partners around this time, when he did, the conversation was focused on voicing the bitterness and hatred he felt towards his father more openly, as well as having plenty of vitriol for his wife, but refused to elaborate on the reason for his anger.
感觉自己浑身上下都要瘫痪似的，就疯了，有点脑袋也不听使唤了，就想喊嘛又不敢喊。
It was notable that during his confession to the police, when referring to the 2 boys, he first would describe them as the children, before quickly correcting himself and calling them his sons. With all the family members involved dead, police had to accept his reason for wiping out his family, and on August 12, 2010, Li Lei appeared in court facing 6 counts of intentional homicide. Sitting in court waiting for proceedings to begin, an emotional and angry relative, unable to control himself, had to be held back from attacking Li Lei, who barely reacted. After pleading guilty to all counts, and giving his reasons for his actions being due to long-term family grievances, Li Lei was handed a death sentence. His final words in court were that he hoped his death would come quickly. However, while being held in custody awaiting his punishment, it seemed he had a change of heart. While he wouldn't appeal his sentence, he did appeal the amount of compensation he'd been ordered to pay his grandparents and the family of Wang Meiling. The court ordered him to pay compensation amounting to almost 3.5 million yuan, but he argued that his grandparents should receive more. He then attempted to write a will, leaving all his assets to his grandparents, who'd taken care of him during his early childhood, the only time in his life he was truly happy. It appeared he was making a last-ditch attempt to prevent his wife's family from receiving anything from him. When his finances were investigated, it was discovered he had assets worth a little over 8 million yuan. The validity of the will was rejected, and settling the issue would take a further 4 years. Eventually, the court decided that the grandparents of Li Lei on both his mother and father's side would receive close to 7 million yuan, while the parents of Wang Meiling would get the remainder. The decision was made in this manner, as the grandparents of Li Lei no longer had a family to take care of them in their old age, while the parents of Wang Meiling had other children to support them in their retirement. The Wang family appealed the court's decision, but the original ruling would be upheld. While the legal battle rumbled on over the 4 years, Li Lei was already gone. He was executed on September 16, 2011. Being interviewed shortly before his punishment was carried out, he was asked if he felt any regret over his actions. He replied that the only regret he felt was for taking something from his grandparents, uncle, and the parents of Wang Meiling, but he never admitted any real sense of remorse for wiping out his family. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, leaving a comment, and subscribing to the channel. And hope to see you again for the next dark tale from the Middle Kingdom.